Good morning, church. It is great to be with you today. Well, we're just 10 days away from Halloween, and I don't know if that excites you or interests you. Maybe you don't like Halloween at all, and you just turn your lights off and you just hope the neighbor kids just walk on by. I'm hoping that some of you really like Halloween and you're willing to drive down here on Halloween night and set up your cars and let the community come here to us at Zion and trunk or treat with us. When I was a kid, Halloween just wasn't totally my thing. I loved the candy, and I loved kind of the adventure and going out and the excitement of it, but what I struggled with was always the costumes. I always kind of felt like my costume just wasn't quite good enough. Like lots of kids would go out and buy their costumes. They'd have the mask or the cape or whatever it was, the perfect suit. But normally in my family, we just kind of put together what we had, or my mom would sew or make a costume, and then she'd put, face paint on us, and we'd wear it to school, and we'd run around and sweat and smear it, and by the time the night came, I just kind of felt like I was unraveling a bit. I actually feel like I've gotten better at Halloween as I've gotten older. Last year at our trunk or treat, I had this great experience where I wore this Paw Patrol costume, this great big dog costume, and it has this huge head that you put on, and so from head to toe, you're just completely immersed in this disguise, in this costume, which I just loved. And some kids were so excited to see me, and some kids were just terrified, and I loved both responses. I thought both were so great. You don't normally see kids a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks after Halloween still wearing their masks and their costumes. But what's fascinating is that even though kids know a costume, a mask is just for special occasions, I feel like grown-ups have learned to wear masks and pretend all the time. We've learned to pretend and to cover ourselves up so that people think we are the way they think we're supposed to be. For example, we might wear a mask at work and pretend to be a certain way, or maybe in our marriage, maybe we wear a mask and we don't let our spouse really get to know us, or maybe we wear a mask in our parenting and we pretend like we've got it all figured out, even though no parent ever has had it all figured out. And I know without a question, so many people wear masks to church. We put on this smile and this look and the nice clothes, and we just hope that people don't see the real us. There's such a shame in that, such a huge loss. But we wear masks because we're afraid, or we're embarrassed, or we feel like we aren't the way we're supposed to be. I think maybe most of all, we wear a mask because we think that it's working. We think that we're actually fooling people, that we're tricking them. I think sometimes we even get into this thought that we're tricking God, that we've pulled one over on him and the mask has worked. When we started this series, Love Does, we talked about love does something. It doesn't just talk about it, doesn't just plan it. Love actually takes action and does something. Last week we talked about love does forgiveness, and that there's nothing you could ever think or say or do or that God couldn't forgive, because love does forgiveness. This morning I want to talk about this idea that love does transparency. Love does transparency. God does transparency. It's interesting as you read through the Bible that you just see that so clearly again and again, that we have this transparent God. For example, in Genesis 1, God looks each day at what he's made and he says, "This is good. I'm happy with how this turned out. I'm proud of the way that this has worked out." Until after creation, he looks and sees that Adam is all alone, and he says, "This isn't good. I'm not happy with this." And then later on, we just continue to see that when we get to Genesis 6, God is so transparent in how he feels. I actually want to read that for you. God says this. He says, "The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled." That's pretty transparent, isn't it? God looks at the world and says, "What have I done? I regret what's happened. I regret that I've started this in the first place." He's deeply troubled inside. God continues to be transparent. I think about as God the Father watches his Son, Jesus. He says things like, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I'm well pleased." Or, "This is my Son whom I love. Listen to him." He's so transparent in what he wants from us and how he feels about us. A few years ago, I took my Bible and opened up to the Gospel of Mark, and I just started underlining all the different words, the feeling, the heart words that I came across. It was a really neat way to kind of study the Bible. What I saw there was just this incredible transparency again. People were amazed, surprised, in disbelief, upset, angry, disappointed, frustrated, all these different emotions, revealing how people are and who they are and what they felt. Love does transparency. God is transparent. Jesus was incredibly transparent. I don't know if you've really thought about this before, but the way Jesus chooses to disciple his disciples just involve this enormous amount of transparency. Jesus doesn't tell the disciples to meet him each morning at 9 a.m. and then send them home around 5 or 6. He actually lives with his disciples, not for a week or a month, but for years, actually. They do life together, and there comes a point where there's no other option except to be transparent. I mean, these guys saw Jesus first thing in the morning where, his hair was all over the place and he had wrinkles on his face from his pillow, and the disciples saw Jesus when he had food maybe in his beard, or when he was angry or happy or sad, all those different things. These disciples would have had to stand around and wait sometimes while Jesus had to go and use the bathroom. There's this incredible level of transparency that Jesus had. And there's something about that type of transparency, when love does transparency, that allows other people to be transparent. I was thinking about a bunch of stories, but one of them that comes to mind is the story of Zacchaeus. I want to read that for you and just kind of point out the transparency that we see, because Jesus first demonstrates it. It says this: Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Somehow, the transparency of Jesus impacts Zacchaeus. We don't know how Zacchaeus has heard about Jesus, but in this story we get such a clear glimpse into the life of Zacchaeus. Think about a time where you've been at a parade maybe, and all the adults are lined up, and it kind of just works that the tall people end up at the back, or if they don't, then people kind of budge in, wrestle in, and make room so that everyone can see. And at parades I've been to, people just make a way for the kids to get up to the front so they can see, and everyone's able to see. But when Zacchaeus comes, wanting to see Jesus, nobody makes room for him at all. It's like these people make a wall to keep him out. And it's because they all know Zacchaeus. They know this guy. They know that he's a cheat. He's a tax collector. He's not an honest guy. He's been stealing from them. And so they're like, "No way, get out of here." But Zacchaeus is so intrigued by Jesus, so desperate to catch a glimpse of him, that he sorts out the path that Jesus is on. He runs ahead, and then this wealthy, this rich guy, like hikes up his robes and climbs up this tree. And now all of a sudden, here's Zacchaeus kind of suspended up in this tree, looking down just eagerly and intently at Jesus. And sure enough, Jesus spots him and marches straight up to him and says, Zacchaeus, get down from there. I'm coming to your house. Well, there's Zacchaeus, and he's delighted. And so he kind of scrambles down the tree and dusts himself off. And he's just so excited that Jesus is going to come and visit with him. Next, we see the transparency of the crowd. They're upset. They're angry. They're disappointed. All of a sudden, they're kind of scoffing at Jesus and saying, what's this guy doing? He's going to go spend his time with a sinner. All sorts of us were lined up. There's way better choices here for Jesus to spend his time with. But moved by this act of love that Jesus shows, moved by this act of unasked for kind of forgiveness in a way, Zacchaeus is just moved. And he says right there on the spot, look, Lord, if I'm going to give half my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody, I'm going to pay them back 4 times what I took. And I just kind of picture in my mind that immediately there's a lineup of people heading towards Zacchaeus saying, yeah, me, you stole from me, but Zacchaeus is all in. This act of love and forgiveness and transparency on Jesus' part leads Zacchaeus, allows for Zacchaeus to also act in love and forgiveness and transparency. I feel like we see that again and again in the stories of Jesus. Another place I see that is the story of the woman at the well. Here's Jesus talking to this woman, and she, as far as we can understand, seems like she's an outcast from the community. And she doesn't bring it up, but Jesus does and says, I know that you've been married 5 times. Now you're living with some guy who's not your husband. And yet he's able to say it in such a loving, accepting kind of way that she doesn't march off in a huff, but she actually goes away and goes to this community who have turned on her, turned away from her. And she says to them, look, you've got to come and see this man who's told me everything I've ever done. Somehow there's just this sense of acceptance, this ability to be transparent. Even though everyone knew, but just to be able to say it, to name it. This is true. What this guy just said about me is true, but I want you to come and meet him. I'm not going to try and hide or lie about it anymore. I see that with the disciples, this group of fishermen. A couple times they're trapped in this storm in the Sea of Galilee, and they have to, one time they wake up Jesus and they're just so transparent. Don't you care if we die in this storm? Another time they see Jesus walking on the water and they're just terrified, and that just comes through so clearly in the story. Or other times they have to pull Jesus aside and they're just so honest about it. Jesus, we have no idea what you've been talking about. Could you please explain that to us? In the face of the transparency of Jesus, other people feel the freedom to be transparent. I think it's because he was so loving, so forgiving, so graceful, that it gave them that opportunity as well. When I was in grade 1, there was this just fantastic teeter-totter at my school. And it was actually just this huge log. I lived in a lumber town, and they just nailed a log to a pivot, and off we went. And this log teeter-totter could easily hold 5 or 10 or 20, even more kids on it. And what would happen is there would just be gangs of kids would pile on each side, and we'd try and get the other side stuck up in the air. It was just super fun. And what happened is one day my side got caught up in the air, and since it was just this log, kids would just slip right off, and that's what happened to me. I slipped off, I landed on the ground with a thud and thought, oh, that hurts. But I didn't want anyone to know how hurt I was. And so I just went through the rest of the day and didn't say anything. When my mom came to get me at the end of school, I was trying to change my shoes, and I just couldn't even get my shoe on my foot because my arm hurt so badly. And there, in the presence of my mom, I just remember it so clearly in this boot room that my school had. I just started to cry and cry because my arm hurt. And finally, in the presence of my mom, finally in the presence of that love where I just knew that I was loved and cared for and accepted, I just started crying and saying, my arm hurts. And so she took me to the doctor, and sure enough, I'd broken my arm. But I didn't want my friends to see me cry, and I didn't want my teacher to see me cry. I was only in a place where I felt safe to be transparent. Love does transparency because it allows other people to be transparent as well. That transparency creates community. Just think for a second about friendships you've developed. They've developed because someone allowed you to see a part of them. Something they were interested in, something they cared about. Maybe it was something simple like, hey, I like bird watching. And everyone else says, I like to watch birds too. Let's go bird watching together. Or maybe it's, I like watching hockey and cheering for the Oilers, or cheering for the Canucks, whoever it is, and say, hey, I like that too. And so off you go and, you watch hockey together. Or maybe if you're willing to be a bit more transparent, maybe people get together and say, I'm kind of struggling with depression. I'm just kind of feeling down. And if you have the transparency to say that, you'd find out that there's people everywhere with that same struggle. And maybe as you come together, you can have some community. Maybe you say, we're kind of struggling in our marriage and could use some help working through that. And you'd find out, there's all sorts of people who could use a tune-up in their marriage. The more transparent we are, the closer a community we can create. Love does transparency because transparency creates community. And what happens in that community is that people can support each other. Man, you're struggling with depression? Well, I've been there too, and I found that this worked. Or can I pray for you? Can I go to a doctor's appointment with you? Is there some way I can support you? Or, you're struggling with a loss. We're going through a loss too. Maybe we can support each other because we get it more than other people can get right now, just because we're in the same place. I've got this great friend we met in university, and she just has just the greatest joy, the greatest laugh. She's just this incredible person. And years ago, I remember she got engaged and married, and we were just all so excited for her. And I know that one of her great hopes was to start a family. And so not long after she got married, I think we got news that that's what they were hoping, that they would be able to start a family. But as time went on, it just wasn't happening for them. And so they went to doctors and did tests, and they just couldn't find out what's going on. Why isn't this working? So then I remember just a few years ago getting a message, and it was sent out to a group of people, to this community that she trusted. And she said, hey, this isn't working. We really long to have a family, and so we're going to try in vitro fertilization. Could you pray for us? And I remember thinking at the time, that's transparent, right? I mean, you're kind of letting us into some significant details of your life. Well, we heard back after that it didn't work. And so then, because of her vulnerability, we were able to encourage her. I remember another message came, and the same thing happened. And then I think it was maybe a year ago, maybe even a little bit less, they were trying for a third time. And so there was just this huge community that was supporting her and praying for her and emailing and texting. And then one day a mutual friend posted a message saying, they're just too heartbroken to share with you right now. But it didn't work. This week we got a message again from my friend. And she said, we're trying again. It's the fourth time, and the doctors don't think all my hormones are quite right. They don't think it's the perfect time, but they think we just need to go for it because that window is getting shorter. And I don't know how that story's going to end. But I just think, when love does transparency, it allows for other people to share their story, and it also allows for this community to build where we can support each other. And so if my friend's not able to have a baby, I know that she'll grieve that with her husband. But there's no way they'll grieve that alone, because there's this whole community that's gathered around to support them. And I know what I'm hoping for is that they are able to have a baby, and there's just going to be this explosion of joy kind of around the whole world as friends and family of theirs just say, yes, we've been praying for this for so long. We're just so excited for you guys. Love does transparency because it allows us to be real and support one another in ways where it really matters. The flip side of that is that transparency can be risky. If I open up to you, can I trust you with what I've shared? If I open up to you, will you still love me and receive me, or are you going to kind of change your opinion about me? If I open up, if I'm transparent with you, will you still love me, or will you reject me and turn away from me? Miranda and I had the chance to connect with a young adult over the summer, and they were saying that they just wish that their church would be more transparent. And so through the conversation, the question kind of came up, well, would this person be willing to be transparent with their church? And the answer almost immediately was like, no way. Like, I long for this transparency, but it's not going to start with me. There's this real risk, and maybe you've been transparent before and felt like it didn't go well. Here's what I can promise you, though. When you're transparent with God, He will never, ever reject you. When you're transparent with God, this incredible thing happens because the truth is, He already knows. God already knows all those details about you. That mask you've been wearing, that thing you've been using to hide, hasn't worked at all. God has seen you and known you and loved you since before you were ever born. Absolutely, sin gets in the way. Absolutely, we fall short. Absolutely, we blow it in things that we think or do or say. But God keeps on loving us. In fact, God is so transparent in that He tells us all through the Bible that while we were still sinners, He loves us. He tells us while we were still enemies, He dies for us. He tells us that the whole point of Jesus coming for us is because He loves us and wants to rescue us. If you're transparent with God, He will never, ever, ever reject you. In fact, He calls us to be transparent so that then He can turn to us and forgive us. Because love does something, and love does forgiveness, and love does transparency. Last year at Trunk or Treat, our Halloween event, I told you I was wearing that great big Chase Paw Patrol costume, this great big dog head. And at some point in the night, what I really wanted to do was just to be able to take it off and say, ta-da, it's me, I'm here. I don't want to hide behind this mask anymore. But the truth is, everybody already knew. I mean, everybody, I think, had it figured out already. Oh yeah, there's Pastor Ian marching around in this great big dog suit, and he's not fooling anybody. Church, God knows you. God knows your sins. God knows your hopes. He knows your dreams. He knows your loves. He knows every single thing about you. And He loves you. He delights in you. He rejoices over you. He sings over you. God has been so transparent with us. Wouldn't it be so great to be more transparent with Him? And to let that transparency spill over into your friendships, into your marriage, into your parenting, into your career. You know, I'm not suggesting that you need to go to the grocery store and just tell the person across the counter your whole life story. Wouldn't it be great, though, if this was a transparent church where we could just be honest about all the joys and about all the struggles and everything in between? With God, the risk isn't that He'll reject you. The risk is that you'll go through this whole life hiding and never get to really have life to the fullest and freedom to the fullest that He talks about. Church, may you know this incredible love. May you know that love does something. That God sent his Son to live and die and rise again for you. May you know that love does forgiveness. That the reason Jesus lived and died and rose again was that you could have forgiveness and freedom. May you know that love does transparency. And that just like God fully knows you, one day you can fully know him. May that be true of us more and more every day, because love does. Amen.